Okay, so in this lecture, we're going to look at formulas. So we've finally done it. We have covered basic maths, brackets, and cell references. So now we can start to build and use formulas. Now we're going to apply our formulas to two basic areas, maths and text. Why? Well, for one thing, most people identify with one or the other or both. Secondly, it's a bit more meaningful to apply formulas when you're learning them, where you go, okay, I can do that already with a paper and pen, so let's see how it translates to the computer via Excel. Right, so let's start. Maths formulas. Right, so what we're going to do is basically describe a quick problem, show how we can use formulas to basically solve the problem, in other words, get the answer to our question, and then break down how we actually enter in the formula, and we're just going to observe the different types of things that happen as we type a formula. Okay, so here we've got a couple of numbers ranging from 20 to 80. Now, we want to answer the question, what is the average of all these numbers? Now, if you were doing this, say, on a calculator, you'd simply add up all the numbers and divide it by the total amount of numbers, which will give you the average, or the mean, as they say. So, can we do this in Microsoft Excel? And the answer is yes, we can. And we do that by using a function called average to build our formula, and using that, it will give us the answer. So, let's move on over to this part here, our formula syntax. So we've got this formula here, equals average, and we've got brackets, and then we specify the range of numbers, and then we've got the bracket closed. And this is basically saying, give me the average of this set of numbers. Now I've typed in the formula into this cell. And as you can see, it's in the formula bar. And of course, if I double click, you can see the formula pop up. Now folks, just quickly, I've got this formula here, which is basically a copy of this. So believe it or not, there's actually a function in here, which is basically saying, display the formula text of whatever is in this cell. So I've included this bit here just so that when you download the workbook later on, to save you double clicking into each cell to reveal the formula, you can just see it here. And then in this cell, you've got the result. So in this case, you see 35, which is the average of all these numbers. Okay, so now the next thing we're going to do is basically type in the formula, because this is where the cool stuff starts to happen as you type in. And you will see the kind of things that Microsoft Excel provides to help you get your formula correct. So I'm going to replicate the formula here in this cell. So the first thing you do when you create a formula is you type in equals. Then you type in the name of the function that you're going to use. So in this case, we want to use the average function. Now watch what happens as I start to type. See that? I typed one letter and we got a little drop-down menu. Now, this is basically Excel's way of really helping us out. So what it does is that it starts to list all the available functions starting with the letter A, because that's what I typed. So it's almost like when, for example, you go to YouTube and you start to type in a video you want to search, and the search gets narrower and narrower as you type. Exactly the same thing's happening here. In addition to giving us the function name, we also get a description of what the function does. And that's the key critical element when you're typing a formula and you need to call up a function, because it will actually explain to you what the function does. So you can decide, do you need it or do you not need it? So I'm going to carry on typing. And as you can see, as I carry on typing, Excel has narrowed down the list of functions available based on what I've typed. Now in this case, we've got 5 different functions with the word average in. So which is the one we want? Well, we could go through this list, and as you click on each different function, a description appears describing each function purpose. Now, one thing to note here is that we're actually asking something very simple in this case. What's the average? So if we start on this one, average, it simply says returns the average arithmetic mean of its arguments, which can be numbers or names, arrays or references that contain numbers. So in this case, we know that we've got all these numbers here, and this is what we want. It's a simple function which just gives us the average. If we look at the other ones, for example, average this says returns the average arithmetic mean of its arguments, evaluating text and faults in arguments as 0, and true, which is as 1. Now, without going into details, we're not actually looking at this one, and a clue to give you a tip as to why you should not use it is because it's actually a bit more complicated based on the description, where it's saying it evaluates text as well, because we have no text for one thing, so we don't want that. If we look at this one, average if, it says find average arithmetic mean for the cell specified by a given condition or criteria. Now, we don't have any criteria, we're just looking plain and simple for the average, so we don't need that. Then we got this one, average ifs. Now, if you look very carefully, there's just an S added here. Apart from that, these two are actually spelt the same. So one can infer this is probably a more plural version of that because of the S. And if you read the description, it is, because it's allowing you to have more than one criteria to get the mean. So we don't want that. Now we've got daverage, which is averages the values in a column in a list or database that match conditions you specify. And again, we don't have any conditions, so we don't want to use this function. So we want to go back to this one, average. So if I click on that, you can see that it suddenly changed to all capitals and an open bracket has been produced. Now, our little drop-down menu has gone because we've selected our function. And we've got this tooltip here, which is basically saying average, open bracket, number 1, comma, and then we've got our next argument. So what Excel is basically telling us is, for this bolded argument here, we need to enter a number. Then when we finish that, to get to the second argument, we'd press comma, and then enter in a value for that. Now, because we've got a set of numbers, we can actually enter in our cell reference using just the first argument. So to do that, what you do is basically use your mouse and you left click on your first cell that you want your range to start from. Now, you've got these little train tracks which are moving here, and you can see here that Excel has already entered in C14. Then, if you head on over to here, if you move your mouse, you can see that the cursor changes to these two arrows. Now remember, we're trying to work out the average. So basically what we want to do is select the range of numbers from the start to the end. Now over here, we know that our last range cell to select is C23, which is here. And then that will tell Excel, calculate the average starting from here all the way to here. Because remember, we've got these two dots, and these two dots basically mean go from C14 to C23. So, using your mouse, you press and hold the left mouse button over this part of the cell. So make sure your cursor goes to these two arrows. And as you can see, as you press the mouse button down, the train tracks go and you get a more solid type of block around the cell. Now, here's where the fun part is. If you watch me move up and down my mouse cursor, you can see that Excel is changing the cell accordingly, the cell reference. So in this case, we've got C21. Now we've got C22. So we want to go to C23. So remember, you still got to hold the mouse button down. So I'm just going to go all the way down to C23. Now, once we've got our selected range, you simply let go of the left mouse button. There. Now, one quick thing to note, folks, is when you type in different arguments for any function, for example, you will get different colors. So if I was to enter in a second set of numbers, I would get a different color to this one here. And the reason Excel does this is because it makes it much easier for you to actually see what numbers on a spreadsheet you're actually referencing. If it's color coded, it's almost always easier because you can see the different colors which matches to your arguments. Okay, so we've got our argument filled in here, which is C14 to C23. Now, we don't need a second argument value to enter. So, I'm going to close the bracket. Now, if you just saw that, you could see that the bracket's just quickly bolded. And that just basically indicates that this bracket corresponds to that bracket. So, that's another thing. When you do brackets, just remember that for each opening bracket, you've got to have a corresponding closing bracket. So that's the reason why when we did this feature here, Excel quickly flashed this bracket and made it bold, just to indicate that this bracket is closing this bracket here. Okay, so now we've typed in our formula. If I press enter, you can see that we get 35. So that's it, folks. That's how you type a formula in. Now, just to show you that this formula actually works, if I change this number here to, let's say, 100, there, you can see that the average is updated to 42. So I'm just going to undo that action. And of course, if you want to test this, then again, just add up all these numbers and divide it by the total. So you can do this on pen and paper, and you can also do it on a calculator as well. Okay, so let's ask another question. What's the most frequent number? So we've got all these numbers here, and we want to know what's the most frequent. Now, this is known as finding the mode of a set of numbers. So, again, we've got the formula here, which is basically copying the formula written in here. So I've included this, the text version, as well as the actual formula, just to make it a bit easier. Now, again, we're using a function that Excel's provided called mode, and we're selecting our range of numbers. So, if I just click into here and double click, now again, our range of numbers has been selected here, and you can see this because we've got our thick blue rectangle border, and the color is matching to this color here, which is the first argument. Right, so let's type this one out and see what we get. So if I press equals, remember, that's what you start off with in formulas in Excel, and I start to type mode. Now, as you can see, we get our drop-down list of all the functions starting with M, and as we go on further typing, the list gets smaller. Okay, so you can see we've got 3 functions starting with mode. Now, again, when you're doing this for the first time and you're learning formulas, always read the description. So, just reading it, it says, returns a vertical array of the most frequently occurring or repetitive values in an array or range of data. For a horizontal array, use transpose, brackets, mode.mult, brackets, number 1, number 2. Okay, so we're not interested in this one. And the key reason is here is we're not dealing with arrays. Now, arrays are a more complex topic in Microsoft Excel. They are powerful in their own right, but for this instance, we don't need it. So we're going to ignore that one. Let's go to this one, mode.sngl. Now this says returns the most frequently occurring or repetitive value in an array or range of data. So this sounds like something we could use. Let's just look at this one. Mode. This function is available for compatibility with Excel 2007 and earlier, and it returns the most frequently occurring or repetitive value in an array or range of data. So this one and this one both look like ones we can use, because we're not interested in this array bit, but rather the range of data. These numbers are a range of data, and we just want the most frequently occurring number. So we can use either this one or that one. Now, just to ensure compatibility with earlier versions of Excel, and also just for a bit more simplicity, we're going to go with this one. So if I double click, you can see that it suddenly makes my typed in function go to capital letters. We've got, again, our open bracket, and we can see our little tooltip here. It says mode, brackets, number 1, comma, and then it's got our second argument here. Now, again, similar to when we did the average function, you can enter the first argument as a range of numbers. So we can use the previous method where we click here and then basically drag down, or we can type it in. And there's also a third way, which is similar to what we did the first time. Now, I'm going to type it in first, just to give you an idea of what it looks like when you type it, and then I'm going to do the third way, just to show you that, there are a couple of ways you can do this, and whichever one you find easier, you just do it to suit your level of comfort. So in this case, I'm going to type. Right, so our first cell is C14, and our end cell is C23, and we need these two dots here to join them to make a range of numbers. So if I type in C14, now you can see a drop-down list is appearing. Now why is this appearing? Well, in Excel, when you build formulas, you can have formulas which contain functions which take arguments as other functions. So in this case, Excel doesn't know what we're doing, so it's assuming that we're trying to put another function in to our mode function and build a formula like that. But if I start to type numbers, you can see that that disappears. We get a blue color, and we get our cell highlighted here, C14. Right, so I'm going to put the two dots, then I'm going to type in C23. And as you can see, Excel has highlighted our selection here. So that's one way you can do the actual entry. The other way is if I simply click in, but when I click in, if I keep the mouse button held down constantly, if I then drag down, you can see that I can adjust the range accordingly. Now, the first method I showed you, you actually click in once and then let the mouse button go, and then you move the mouse cursor to the bottom corner of the cell to get the cursor to change to those double arrows, and then you left click and then drag down. So that way is pretty much the same as this way, except it's just one step extra. And again, as you're doing this as a beginner, you want to take it at your own pace. If you find the first method easier, do it. If you find typing it in easier, then do it. And if you find this method easier, then do this one. One thing to remember in Microsoft Excel is that there are a lot of ways to do the same thing. Okay, so now that I've got this range selected, I'm going to close the bracket. As you can see, our tooltip has disappeared. Then I'm going to press enter. There. And as you can see, we've got 20 as our result. So now you can see how we built two simple formulas which can perform two real-life operations that we could ordinarily do with pen and paper. Now, again, this example here is very basic, but you imagine you have thousands or hundreds of thousands of numbers and you need a calculation done. Excel can do it just like that. Okay, so we're going to now do some tasks and basically just work through a couple of maths formulas just to get a familiarity with actually typing them. And then after that, we're going to look at some text functions and integrate them into formulas. and again do some tasks just to build up your understanding and typing of the formulas. Now, this is quite a long topic which we've just gone over, so by all means feel free to watch it again. And remember, start practicing as well. You know, if you've got some questions in terms of formulas that you want answered, start writing them down, because by the end of this section, you will probably have an inkling to go and build your own formulas. So it's always good to start off now rather than later. Okay, so I'll see you in the next lecture.